start chapter 3. I'm going to turn this off for like 2 seconds while just to quickly review. In chapter 2, we went over 4 areas of development when it came to early societies. Okay, the first was Mesopotamia, because they were in fact the first. We went through the whole thing, near the river and food and people and, all of that stuff. Eventually it grows into 2 kingdoms, a Sumer and Akkad. Eventually Akkad takes over the entire area, all right? We looked at Egypt, and they developed same way as Mesopotamia. They, of course, unite as a kingdom a lot faster. We divide Egyptian history into 3 parts, and so last chapter we looked at the Old Kingdom and how, Egyptian society developed and their beliefs and religion and all that. The Old Kingdom ended both because of corruption and a drought, and so the drought basically just exacerbated the conditions. And so the Old Kingdom falls apart into various civil wars that Egypt basically fought for about 100 years. Okay. India, same thing. Along the Indus River, we have a society that's centered around the city of Harappa. Okay. The one thing that is different about India is that they grow a crop that has nothing to do with eating. So we mentioned that cotton. I have just 3 question marks there because we have no clue what happened to them. The society just completely collapsed and they disappeared. And because we can't translate their writing, we really don't know, all right, what eventually became of them. Finally, in China, we actually get 2 societies developing. The society along the Yellow River, okay, the bad one, all right, basically doesn't get past the whole primitive stage because the Yellow River was so destructive, excuse me, and would cancel out any kind of progress they ever made. The society that's farther south that develops along the Yangtze, that one does advance a bit more, and they are able to build up, okay, and they do make it to the verge of becoming one of these civilizations, one of these complex societies, all right? Geography slows them down, which is why it takes them so long, and also the fact that there aren't a lot of animals for them to domesticate. Eventually, though, right when they're about to turn that corner, we see that the area is also hit with drought, and it causes this emerging society to completely collapse as well. Now, just because the society has collapsed does not mean that everyone just is gone, okay? The people are there. There's just like no central government. Maybe they're grouped in little villages or by family, little clans or little groups that kind of get together, to help each other survive, all right? Now, we start with those hordes, those herders that are wandering across Central Asia for thousands of years, all right? Because they are not immune to this environmental disaster. It appears that this drought that we're seeing is a universal thing. And so these hordes that are wandering back and forth along the plains of Asia, they also begin to feel the effects of this drought. Now remember, whenever they needed something that their herds couldn't provide, they would swoop down, raid a village, pillage, plunder, steal, burn, kidnap, and then, head back, and then they would continue. And then the next time they needed something from a village, they would, swoop down and pillage, plunder, steal, kidnap people, and, then go off, and they have all of their stuff. Well, what begins to happen, though, remember, the cities are suffering from drought. They're suffering this same environmental collapse. So as the hordes move in, there's not a whole lot there, okay? Sometimes there's not even people anymore. So they have to go farther and farther south okay, to be able to find those resources. And what ends up happening is that they shift so far south that they're just like, well, we might as well just stay here, okay? We already conquered these people. They're already afraid of us. And we know if we go back to Central Asia, we're not going to have, like, it's still going to be a drought, and we're still going to be, kind of like, suffering. But they've got, stuff here that we need. So in many cases, they just stayed, all right? And so we begin to see the merging, okay, of whatever societies are there. Okay, let me do this real quick. Okay. Whatever society, whether it's Mesopotamia or Egypt or the leftovers of India, and these hordes that have been wandering Asia for thousands of years. Now, they do bring in some significant changes, okay? 2 of them, to be precise, and I am going to ask you this on the test, okay? And we refer to them as the Indo-European migrations. Okay, because, number 1, they bring their language with them, and their language begins to mix with the language of the locals, okay? And it is this mixing that leads us to some of the ancient languages, like Sanskrit and Persian, that eventually become Greek and Latin. And I am sorry, I should have put, the descendants of Latin, like Spanish and French and Italian, okay? And then, of course, that kind of shifts into German, and then the descendants of German, which are languages like English and every Northern European language. And so, if it wasn't for this mixing, we have other languages, but language, at least in Northern and Western Europe, wouldn't have developed the way it developed, okay? And that is why there are so many similarities between European languages when it comes to certain root words and certain basic words, way different from like Asian or African or Native American languages, okay? But this is where those roots come from, all right? And number 2, this is why we'll talk about them invading Mesopotamia. This is why we can still read the old cuneiform, because these tribes took the written languages that they found and adapted it to their own, okay? And so we're able to kind of work backwards that way, and we get languages like Sanskrit, and then later on, we get languages like Persian, and so we're able to work backwards that way, okay? The other thing that they bring to the area is a horse culture, all right? Because since they were following these giant herds of all kinds of animals, they needed horses to keep up with them, okay? All of these other societies, believe it or not, did not have a horse culture, okay? They weren't using horses for transportation or for pack animals or anything. All of a sudden, here come these soldiers on horseback, okay, firing arrows. Oh yeah, they did take the invention of the wheel and adapted it and made chariots. And so now, not only do you have horseback riders, horseback warriors, but you also have like chariot warriors. And in this case, the people have no defense. They have no idea what's going on with these horses and chariots coming at them. And so they bring horse culture into these areas. And so from this point on, people are like, hey, it kind of makes sense. Let's tie our wagons to these animals. Let's, ride them, and we can go places. And we can do all kinds of things, okay? So 2 biggest influences that these Central Asian hordes have in this area: language, horses, all right? Of course, the map, you knew that was coming. And so the brown is where the different various tribes are wandering, and they're going back and forth across Asia for thousands of years, okay? And when this worldwide drought hits, okay, yes, groups begin to head farther south. So there is a group that goes into India, and the leftovers of whatever society was there. There is a tribe that goes into Mesopotamia and takes it over. There's another tribe that makes it all the way into Egypt and is able to take over Egypt. And then there's a group that actually conquers what is modern day Turkey. All right. Now, that's not to say there weren't others. That's not to say, like, they didn't go into China and, into Europe itself proper. But we're only going to look at those areas. Unfortunately, we can't spend time looking at every tribe and every change there. All right. So we're going to start with Egypt. Okay. Now, this we already know. Okay. The Old Kingdom collapsed. All right. Due to a drought. But also because of the government corruption, and the drought basically exacerbates the political conditions. And so, for about 100 years, okay, Egypt is in a state of civil war. Okay, now people refer to it as the first intermediate period. This is going to be a second. That's where the tribes come in. Okay, and so at the end of this 100-year period, one family is victorious, okay? And so we see the establishment of the Middle Kingdom, okay? So now we're dealing with the Middle Kingdom. The Old Kingdom is gone, all right? I promise I will come back, okay? In the Old Kingdom, the capital of Egypt was up here, the city of Giza, okay? The New Kingdom, this new family that has consolidated power, decides to put their capital in the south, the city of Thebes. Mr. Santos, if it's in the south, why did you write Upper Egypt? Remember, the Nile River flows weird, and so we say upper and lower to describe where it starts and where it finishes. So while it is in the south, upper because it's where the Nile starts, okay? So they are further away. Now, a couple things that happen. Number one, religion becomes super, super, ultra, mega important during the Middle Kingdom. Number one. Number two, the power of the pharaoh becomes unchallenged. Last time we let people do things, society collapsed because they were corrupt, and then the drought exacerbated that situation. So number one, Pharaoh is going to have even more power than he did before, number one. Number two, one way to guarantee that power is to impose religion and to tighten the religious grip on the people. All right? And so, the first pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, all right, his name is Amenemhet. Okay, what he does, he's basically like, okay, we need to have this ultimate control over the people. And so, remember, Egyptians are polytheistic. They worship a multiple of gods. And Amenemhet's favorite was the god Ammon. All right? Now, remember that Egyptians believed that their pharaoh wasn't just chosen by the gods, but what was the actual pharaoh? Yeah, part god. Okay? Specifically, the sun god, okay, who's either Re or Ra, all right, however you pronounce it, depending on the translation you read. Well, obviously, as the pharaoh, I can't say that Ammon here is the best, even though I do think he's the best, okay? Because Ra here is my great grandpa. I'm descended from the sun. So what Amenemhet does is he basically combines the sun god Re with his favorite god Ammon into Ammon-Re. Okay, and that's where we get this compound name. He basically combines their powers and the whole thing, and so now it's Ammon-Re. Okay, and Ammon-Re becomes the most important god in Egypt. So during the Middle Kingdom, Ammon-Re was the top, and then Isis and Osiris and all of the other they were just minor gods. Okay, I mean you can still worship Osiris here, a god of nature. All right, but ultimate loyalty and who's in charge? Ammon-Re. Okay? Now, because of this, and we have found the archaeological remains, in the city of Thebes, the temple of Amun-Re was like one of the largest religious structures that we have found in the ancient world. Okay? And so, this is how the pharaoh then is able to maintain power. All right? Through religion, and of course through, controlling pretty much everything. All right? Now, spoiler alert, it works. Okay? During this time, during the Middle Kingdom, now that we have a unified Egypt, now that Egypt is at peace, and now that the pharaoh basically controls all by exerting his power and by manipulating people religiously, okay, Egypt begins to expand via trade, all right? They begin to have commercial success, okay? First into Lebanon. If you recall, thousands of years ago, Lebanon was full of forests, okay? They were all cedar trees, too, all right? So Egypt is able to trade food and other wealth to Lebanon for cedar, okay? What do the Egyptians do with it? I mean, they do woodworking, they use it for carvings and things like that, but predominantly they build a fleet of ships. And those ships, they send south along the Red Sea, and they make it as far as Ethiopia, or I guess what would be modern-day Ethiopia, and they establish a trading relationship with the ancient Ethiopians. All right? So now they're trading with, Lebanon. They're trading with Ethiopia. Okay? As they explore those areas, the area known as the Sinai becomes a part of Egypt. Okay? Traditionally, I mean, today it is, but traditionally it wasn't a specific part of Egypt. And then, during the Middle Kingdom, the Egyptians are able to overcome those waterfalls. They find a way, over and around them. And so they're able to discover another kingdom known as Nubia, which is farther up the Nile, basically in what today would be modern-day Sudan. And the Egyptians are able to establish a trading relationship with the people of Nubia, which makes both kingdoms very, very wealthy. Okay? Now, because all of this is based on trade, all right, it is the merchants, it is the businessmen, it is the ones that are traveling and making these connections that are building up all kinds of wealth and all kinds of money. Eventually, they're like, Rory here is a successful business person who not only trades with Lebanon for wood, but then trades in Ethiopia for exotic plants and animals and is able to make money off of all of that. And why the hell shouldn't I be able to have and keep all of my stuff? Because remember, what were the pyramids built for? The pharaohs. Why? What did the Egyptians believe in? Yes, someone whispered it, afterlife, okay? Yeah, they got to take everything with them into the next life. Well, Rory says, hey, I've become mega rich. You telling me that when I go to the afterlife, I'm just gonna have to leave it all behind? Oh, hell no. All right, I'm building my own pyramid, sticking all my stuff in there. Too bad, grandkids, you get no inheritance. It's coming with me into the next life. Okay, because I'm rich now, I want to be rich in the next life too. All right, and so the smaller pyramids that have been found, okay, it's like, oh, this must have been a crappy pharaoh. No, it was probably just a very wealthy individual who said, hey, I'm taking some of my shit with me into the next life. All right, I'm not going to leave it behind. Why should the pharaohs be the only ones that get to take all their stuff with them? I worked hard for my money. All right, so I'm going to take some of that money with me. All right, besides, the afterlife's expensive. All right, so I'm going to need it. Okay, so we begin to see Old Kingdom, all right, pyramids for the pharaohs. Middle Kingdom, average people, all right, begin to, or at least wealthy average people, begin to build their own pyramids. If you were the working poor, the working class, you still got buried in a communal pit. I mean, you got mummified, but you still went into the pit. Okay, now, how does the Middle Kingdom end? I'm glad you asked. A tribe, one of the Central Asian tribes, so remember, drought, all right, they're plundering, pillaging, raiding, everything is so bad that they have to go really, really, really far south. Well, there is a group known as the Hyksos, okay? The Hyksos are able to make it all the way to Egypt from Central Asia, all right? And, of course, they conquer them, all right? They come in with chariots. They come in on horseback. The Egyptians have no clue what is going on. They have no idea how to fight back against them. All right? I mean, yeah, we've established this kingdom. Yeah, we have trade. But we really don't have a military that can stand up to them. Okay? And so, the Hyksos take over Egypt, and they rule for about another 100 years. Okay? Some history textbooks refer to this as the second intermediate period. Okay? The time when the Hyksos are ruling. But just because the Hyksos took over Egypt does not mean that the majority of Egyptians accepted the Hyksos as their ruler. In fact, during that 100 years of rule, various Egyptian groups would rise up in rebellion and try to overthrow the Hyksos. Most of them fail until a man from southern Egypt named Ahmose, okay, he realized, okay, well, we're not going to overthrow the Hyksos unless we use the same weapons and the same strategy that the Hyksos used to conquer us. And so what he does is, he raises an army. They go, and not only do they steal Hyksos weapons, but they begin to train like the Hyksos. They begin to steal horses and learn how to ride horses. They steal bows and arrows. They learn not only how to shoot bows and arrows, but how to shoot them on horseback. All right? They steal chariots and begin to build more, and they begin to learn how to fight on chariots. It happens so that eventually Moses is able to lead a rebellion, and he's able to overthrow the Hyksos. Okay? I mean, it takes 100 years. All right? But eventually the Hyksos are run out. All right? And Moses then becomes the de facto leader of Egypt. Okay? Now, the Egyptians come, this is now the beginning of the new kingdom. All right? The Egyptians come to the realization that, number one, geography is no longer going to protect them. All right? The Hyksos came all the way from Central Asia. All right? Nothing stopped them. All right? Not the deserts, not waterfalls, not oceans, not anything. They still made it, and they still conquer us. Okay? And so what the Egyptians begin to do, and this is classic of the new kingdom, the Egyptians go on the warpath. They begin to conquer other areas. They begin to expand their influence, so that if anyone ever tries to attack us again, they're going to have to, fight a real army, but they're going to have to make it through all of these areas that we've conquered. Okay, number one. Number two, they take these Hyksos weapons and these Hyksos strategies, and they not only adopt them, but they make them better. They perfect them. Okay, so for a couple hundred years, the Egyptian army was considered the most powerful, the most fiercest, and that's because they adopted Hyksos techniques. Okay, now they are able to conquer from the Mediterranean Sea all the way south to Ethiopia. All right, And they're able to conquer large parts of land in what today we would call Palestine. All right? Now, a couple things during this time, all right? And, well, let me back up. Now, I am going to ask you, like, what effect does the Hyksos invasion have on the Egyptians? They become aggressive. They become conquerors. They become, like, they build up their military, their army, all right? They're not going to be peaceful anymore, number one, okay? A couple of other things, all right, about the New Kingdom. This really has nothing to do with war, okay? There is a woman named Hatshepsut, and you do need to know. I'll call her Hat. If you want to call her Hat, that's fine. But Hatshepsut. What is important about Hatshepsut? She is the first woman ruler. Not just of Egypt, but as far as we know, historically, the first. Okay? She was the queen. Her husband dies. Her husband, the Pharaoh, dies. Okay? His eldest son, who happened to be her stepson, she was the second wife, okay, is only 7 years old. So he is not old enough yet to rule Egypt. Now, when this happens, not just in Egypt, but in other kingdoms throughout history, what happens is someone is appointed to rule in the name of whoever the king is, until they become old enough to be in charge. Okay? That is known as a regent.
So first woman to rule.
Yes, I thought I wasn't sure. Okay? Well, technically she's the regent. So she doesn't rule for herself, she rules in her son's name, but the kid's 7 years old. I mean, how much input does he have? So yes, Hatshepsut is the one calling all of the shots. Okay? Once again, significant because never before had a woman had that much power. All right? Never before. And so even though it's like, in the name of my stepson, this is going to happen. Okay? Stepson's not really saying it. All right? It's Hatshepsut. She's the one, dictating those things. Okay? Under her rule, Egypt once again becomes a commercial power. Egypt again, goes out and makes all kinds of treaties for trade, and Egypt becomes very rich, very powerful. Okay? Eventually, her stepson grows up, becomes, Pharaoh, says, thanks, Mom, thanks, stepmom, for having taken care of things, but it's my turn. All right, I'm going to do this shit now. All right, so Hatshepsut, first female ruler, okay, of Egypt, probably in history. We go down a couple more pharaohs, and we get to Thutmose III. It is under Thutmose that, number one, Egypt truly begins to start conquering other areas. Okay, in fact, he is the first pharaoh of a 200-year line where Egypt is just constantly at war, constantly threatening their neighbors, constantly on the warpath, so that nobody ever crosses them again. All right? Now, I don't ask you to remember a lot of battles or names or dates, but I do need you, because I am going to ask you. The Battle of Megiddo. The Battle of Megiddo is history's first ever chariot-on-chariot battle. Up until this point, the Hyksos had chariots, and they invaded, and they conquered, and they took over all the scared people that had no idea how to fight back. Okay? And then the Egyptians adopted the Hyksos method, and they went out and conquered other people that were scared and ran and had no idea how to fight back. Eventually, the Egyptians run into another group that also have chariots. And it's like, oh shit, what do we do now? We never practiced against other chariots. We just practiced against people on foot. Okay? Spoiler alert, it's a tie. Okay? And they fight a group of people known as the Hittites. We'll talk about the Hittites on Wednesday. All right? But it's a tie. All right? Neither side can get the advantage on the other. So, Battle of Megiddo, first ever chariot-on-chariot battle. Two armies of just chariots go at it. All right? Now, I wish I had a bigger map because it would show that Egypt conquered all the way down to Ethiopia. They do conquer parts over here, but mainly they take over all of this, okay, which for the longest time had belonged to other countries. If you're like Santos, here's Megiddo, okay? This is where the first ever chariot on chariot battle takes place. The purple area is where the Hittites, the group that they were fighting, that's where they were from, all right? And so, this is what basically becomes of Egypt, all right? After those Central Asian tribes attacked, they're expelled, and it makes Egypt much more aggressive militarily, all right? Questions on that? Then, let's move on, I promise. Mesopotamia, the orange place, okay? Same thing happens, all right? There's drought, all right? Those Central Asian tribes come from the north, and they swoop down into Mesopotamia, all right? Now, remember, Mesopotamians are also suffering from the drought, so those tribes decide to stay and they mix with the local people. Now, it was the Hicks. They're all different tribes, even though they're wandering back and forth across Asia. The tribe that invaded Egypt were the Hyksos. The tribe that invaded Mesopotamia were known as the Amorites. Okay, so a group of Amorites enter Mesopotamia. It's still under the control of the Akkadians. It's still Akkad until the Amorites come in and kill the Akkadian king and destroy their stuff and take it over. Okay? Now, they build their own capital near what today is modern-day Baghdad, and they name their capital Babylon. All right? So, in some history books and in some religious books, the Amorites are known as the Babylonians. All right? The only reason they're called Babylonian is because their capital city was Babylon. Okay? Their actual tribal name were the Amorites. Okay? Now, what do the Amorites do? They come in and remember, the Mesopotamians were the ones that invented stuff like wheels and calendars and how to tell time and bronze and writing and, you know, all of this other stuff. And the Amorites look at their stuff and are like, this shit's pretty cool. This is like really advanced stuff, okay? They take Mesopotamian writing, the cuneiform, and they adapt it to their own language, number one. And then, of course, their language mixes with the local language, all right? So once again, that's why we can find those old cuneiform tablets and still be able to read them, all right? Because we can just work our way back with the way the languages evolved. Pretty soon, this Amorite culture mixes with the Mesopotamian culture. So unlike Egypt, where the Egyptians fought back and eventually expelled the Hyksos, the Mesopotamians accepted them. And at first, it's just like the cultural things that are mixing, like our languages are mixing, our writing is mixing. Eventually, the people begin to, you know, intermarry and intermix as well. So that, you know, eventually, Amorites, Mesopotamians, they become one group. You know, there is no difference. Okay? And unlike Egypt, the Mesopotamian kings now, you know, the people love them. All right? Hey, you guys came in, you guys kept our culture, you guys adopted our culture, you guys gave us things like horses and chariots, so you made our culture better. You know, it's a win-win-win-win for pretty much everyone. Okay? Now, you're not going to remember all of the kings because I'm not going to make you do it. All right? But there is one Mesopotamian, one Babylonian, one Amorite king, whatever you want to call them, that you do have to remember. And that is Hammurabi. Okay? Who was Hammurabi? Okay? Well, he is one of these kings, one of these descendants now. because we're talking a couple hundred years now, one of these descendants of this mixing of Mesopotamian and Amorite culture, he basically writes down what becomes known as Hammurabi's Code or the Code of Hammurabi. Now, it is not the first legal system. It is not the first written laws. Those have been around since writing, okay? So what makes Hammurabi's code special? Well, first, most people, okay, when they hear about it or read about it or, we look at it, summarize it as, well, yeah, that's the one, eye for an eye, okay? It believed in total justice, okay? If Rory and I get into a fight and I poke her eye out, then as punishment, my eye gets gouged out, all right? And so now we're even, okay? Justice is served, all right? And while that is what most people think about, it was more complicated than that, okay? There were 282 edicts, 282 rules, and each of those rules had their appropriate punishment, okay, for violating them. All right? Now, some of the basics that had existed, like I said, ever since humans had gotten together in little villages, ever since humans learned how to write, things like theft and murder were obvious. Okay? Those are wrong. Here's the punishment that you're going to suffer for killing someone. Here's the punishment you're going to suffer for stealing things that are not yours. Okay? But the Code of Hammurabi also dictated your behavior in just normal everyday life. All right? Things that did not involve theft, murder, things like that. Okay? That part was kind of new. Okay? The other part, I wrote there negligence. Okay? Yeah, it's understandable. Okay, sorry, Amanda. I kill Amanda, then I'm going to suffer some kind of punishment. All right, that was already decreed. That may have been written down somewhere, etc. Okay, or the example that I used with Rory. I poke Rory's eye, then my eye gets poked out. Okay, justice. We're all fair. What happens if on my property there's a tree, and one day there's a giant storm? And this tree falls over, and it destroys part of Amanda's house. Okay? In other cultures, it's like, well, obviously it was the wind god that did it, and it wasn't Santos' fault, so, I guess you're just going to have to be nicer to the wind god, Amanda, like make a sacrifice, and, I guess we can help you rebuild, type of thing. The Code of Hammurabi said, well, no, because the tree was on Santos' property, and he probably should have maintained it better so that when the wind came, it wouldn't have fallen over. Okay? So, Santos, you're partially responsible. All right? So, the share of responsibility that you have, you need to take care of that. Okay? It could also apply to, I want to say Maya, who is our wagon maker in town. And I buy a wagon from Maya, and as I'm, riding along in my wagon, and now I'm being pulled by a horse because they've got horse culture, we hit a bump and the wheel flies off, okay? Did Maya use cheap wood? Did Maya do poor craftsmanship, or maybe didn't even know how to put a wheel on a wagon? They just said, yeah, it's ready to go, you can go anywhere. Negligence, faulty services. The Code of Hammurabi also talked about that, which was something completely new. Like, what responsibility does the craftsman have for the thing that they make, all right, type of thing, all right? Now, Hammurabi said, I am the king. I'm like everybody's father. I tell you what to do, you do it, okay? Since these were mostly social rulers, men, you are the kings of your family. You need to make sure that your wives and your children follow all of these rules. And they cannot, speak against you the way you would not speak against me. Okay? So that's how we make sure that society runs peacefully. Now, in addition to that, Hammurabi's code did something else. It classified people into 3 categories. Okay? Now, don't try to make too much of it because this is just the way they translate. But aside from the royalty, from like the king and his family, and of course the important priests, there were free persons, which were the upper class. There were dependents, which were like the middle and low class. And then there were slaves. Okay, slaves were slaves. All right? Now, I do have to explain that through most of human history, slavery has existed. Okay? But it has only been within the last, I want to say, 600 years that slavery was associated with a person's color or their skin or their race. Okay? And that's, no offense to my Euro-American friends, that's because of Europeans. Okay? Before that, anybody could be a slave. What would happen was, my city goes to war against Jenna's city. Jenna's city loses this war. Guess what happens to all of the people in that city? They become slaves. Okay, they become the slaves of my city. All right? And so, for the most part, the slaves in most ancient societies were the losing side in wars. Okay? Had nothing to do with race or color or, whatever. All right? So, eye for an eye. Okay? We'll stick with Rory because I already poked her eye out. All right? I poked her eye out. Okay? People's understanding, oh yeah, so sometimes you get your eye poked out too. Well, it depends. If both Rory and I are dependents, if we're both members of the middle/lower class, then yes, I will lose an eye as well. The same way I had Rory lose an eye through whatever I did. If I was a free person though, if I was a part of the upper class, all I had to do was pay a fine. So Rory's blind in one eye, and instead of me losing an eye, I just pay whatever the judge says I have to pay as a fine. If I was a slave though, and for whatever reason, I caused Rory to lose an eye, as a slave, that's an immediate death sentence right there. I die. Not just the eye, the whole life. Okay? Is it really eye for an eye? It depended on the class of the offender and the class of the offended. Okay? So unless Rory and I are of the same social class, okay, the punishment's going to be way different. And typically, even if it was like, if Rory was a slave and I'm the one who, poked the slave's eye out, I would probably just have to pay a fine. And in this case, I would pay a fine to Rory's owner, not to Rory. You're the slave, you're fine. All right, so I give it to the owner. Okay, sorry about hurting your slave, bro. All right, yeah, so accidents, you know how it goes. Oopsie, here's, and actually I do have like another presentation which we'll do on Wednesday. If I were to accidentally kill the slave, and let's say Leah was the owner, I owed Leah half the value of the slave. So Leah's like, it cost me 50 pieces of silver. All right, well, here's 25 pieces. Sorry about killing your slave. Oopsie, shouldn't have stepped in front of my wagon. And there you go. Okay, so that was Hammurabi's code. Okay, we will go into more detail